Hey everybody, welcome to a Hollywood Hot Take, and this one is about an actor by the name of Wendell Pierce. Now, Wendell, for those of you who don't know, played Bunk on The Wire. If you've never seen The Wire, it's a really good show, and he was really good as Bunk. He's also been in a few other shows, and the reason I'm doing a Hollywood Hot Take on him, of course, he's another actor who has TDS and is railing against Trump because he thinks, because he played some important roles, he can stand on a soapbox and somehow get the message out. This kind of saddens me because I'm a huge fan, and I actually had Wendell in mind for one of the characters in Wokistan, a novel. I was picturing him as the centrist speaker who's brought into the college to give a speech, which sparks the entire event in Wokistan and the college protest. I just pictured him for some reason. I don't know. Anyhow, it's another Hollywood actor ranting and saying, oh, Trump, he's a Russian agent. I mean, he's gone back to that, right? This is the damage that places like MSNBC and really the upper echelon Democrats have done, guys like Adam Schiff, have done to the American public. They've actually pushed this story so hard, this ridiculous theory that Trump is a Russian agent. It's like when the Bush administration pushed weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which still a percentage of the population still believes that he had weapons of mass destruction. Oh, but they were quickly moved over to Syria where they were hidden and somehow didn't go off during the big events in Syria post Second Iraq War. And unfortunately, a lot of these, and Wendell's still a good actor. It doesn't impugn his acting abilities. But the thing is, actors, they emote and they feel more than other people. That's kind of their job. So they just get caught up in stuff. And they get caught up in this because partly it gives them a little more exposure. Partly it's sort of I don't know, I guess you'd call it a dog whistle to other people with TDS. And there are a lot in Hollywood, so that's a way to get hired, right? Oh yeah, we got to give that guy a gig because he's a good guy. He came out against Trump and he took a lot of heat for it, but he's part of the resistance. He's one of us. We can give him a gig. I mean, that's kind of the way it works out in LA. You get hired because your friends know you. I mean, that's kind of how I got hired in a couple of things. People through college and high school had got me gigs. It's not, sometimes you get it through talent. I've gotten gigs through talent. I've gotten gigs after being searched out of, hundreds of applicants. Like, wow, your stuff was really good. We picked you. But a lot of times it's just networking. It's just who you know and your friends like you and they say, oh, why don't you work with us? That'll be fun. So, I don't blame Wendell for, being anti-Trump, but I think it's a dumb move. It's getting to be a dumber and dumber move as this grinds on. For the first reason is it helps Trump. It totally helps Trump. He's totally ready for this. It's easy for him to undermine almost anybody in Hollywood who has one of these opinions because they're kind of half-ass opinions. They're kind of not thought out. They just read stuff from these news sources and think they're informed, and you're just not anymore. If you're reading CNN and MSNBC and some and New York Times, I mean that's just New York Times just came out with an article, I think it was today, and first off they're touting we're approaching 100,000 deaths for the beer virus. Whee! Like what kind of headline is that? First off, but anyhow, they listed all the names of the people who died in a weird sort of like, I don't know, worshiping of the dead kind of thing. I don't exactly know what that does other than to sell papers, or virtual papers. But one of the people on that list was a homicide. Okay, he may have had the beer virus, but he was killed. He was actually killed, and they put him as one of the deaths. And this has been an ongoing problem. So the fact that the New York Times is celebrating the lead up and will celebrate the 100,000th death in the United States is ridiculous. What they should be doing is investigating, and there's evidence to suggest that there's been over-reporting, that every old person who died may have had, or a lot of them may have had the beer virus, but they didn't actually die from it. They died from something else. Now, that's not to say, an old person who passed away, that wasn't a contributing factor, but it can be very complicated. And people are just rushing to do that. There was an investigative report from Project Veritas saying that funeral home people were being pressured to write down the virus as a death. And one of the guys said part of the reason was, during the pandemic or prior to the pandemic, what you do is if you found somebody dead, there would be a bit of an investigation, right? Not like a homicide investigation, but like, somebody passed on, you'd have to do a bit of digging to see what they died from. Because of the pandemic, the EMTs were under a great deal of pressure, so what they would do is just write down the beer virus regardless, without doing any investigating, because it was too great of a risk for them to even investigate, because that could have gotten them infected, and they were very much needed during the pandemic, right? You wouldn't want your EMTs sick just because they touched a dead body or whatever. So it was better to isolate. But it was not better to report what was not known. The deaths should have been listed as probable natural causes or something like that, not just listing as the beer virus. Now, part of the reason for that pressure was that the state apparently is seeking more funding from more of these deaths from the feds. So, the feds have, again, and this is the problem with government, they have actually incentivized the beer virus a little bit, because they're giving hospitals money for each beer virus patient they had. They gave them extra money for each one that got put on a respirator. So this unfortunately incentivizes certain medical practices that may or may not be needed. And you can imagine that there's probably a few unscrupulous doctors who will just say, well, the respirator, he doesn't really need it, but put him on it anyway. I mean, that to me is it's just awful. And so you can see why, all this nonsense about the virus has just gone on too long. And, people like Wendell Pierce, being an actor, being very, emotional for his job every day, he gets caught up in it. And a lot of us did. I certainly got caught up in this in the beginning, but now the science is in. In the beginning, we didn't know. I don't think anybody blames the governors, Trump, or anyone for the first month and a half of this. 15 days is slow to spread, yada, yada, yada. Fine. That was all fine. Well, we were all on board. Why not? We weren't sure what to do. Maybe that helped. Maybe it didn't. It looks like it didn't now when you look at a country like Japan that barely locked down, that just people wore masks and did sort of half-ass distancing. Same thing with Sweden. So, maybe it was a wrong move, but, we didn't know what the right move was. So we did something that sounded pretty logical. And for a while, that seemed like a good idea. That was months ago. Now it's time to end that. It's time for people like Wendell just to, dude, back off. Back off and act. Do your acting. Concentrate on that. One of the things about Trump that I don't like is that he is a black hole for the news. Since he came onto the scene in a big way, I used to write jokes about the news all the time. There's almost no other news stories now. It's Trump or it's the beer virus, and that's it. Everything else is just, you can barely, find it. And certainly you can't write any jokes about it because, as I've always said, you need sort of a shared common ground to write a joke. So if nobody knows the news story and I write a joke about it, it makes it a much harder joke to sell. Like, oh, I guess that's true. I guess that's funny because I guess that happened. So we all need a mental break, is what I'm saying. From Trump, from the beer virus, we need to go back to what we were doing before this and, let things settle a bit. Regardless of whether you're a big Trump guy or Biden guy or whatever, it's time to kind of get back to life. We kind of can't do that because everything's being politicized, but hopefully, after Trump's re-election, this will be done. Maybe people will finally kind of just accept that he actually won the presidency in 2016 and that maybe the Democrats didn't have all the answers. Maybe it was just a good time for a guy like Trump to be in and he did well. And we should just be appreciative that we had a Republican that didn't, burn the place to the ground. So let's all just settle down. Let's settle down, Wendell, and let's go back to acting.